Russian sailors in Sevastopol are having nightmares tonight. At 2:47 a.m. local time on the night of April 18th into the 19th, under a moonless sky with rain squalls that Russian commanders had counted on as natural cover, Ukrainian forces unleashed a coordinated drone swarm that turned the supposed sanctuary of the Black Sea Fleet into a blazing kill zone. Explosions ripped through the harbor as unmanned surface vessels and precision aerial drones slammed directly into moored landing ships. The Project 775 large landing ship Yamal and the Project 1171 Nikolai Filchenkov were disabled where they sat, fires raging across their decks, secondary detonations lighting up the night as ammunition and fuel stores cooked off. A critical coastal radar installation was obliterated in the opening wave. Russian crews scrambled in panic, abandoning positions, fighting fires while their own defenses fired blindly into the darkness. This was not a probe. This was not a warning. This was something truly terrifying, a direct, devastating strike deep inside what Moscow has always called its impregnable fortress in Crimea. Let that sink in for a moment. Russian sailors, the men who were supposed to project power across the entire Black Sea, are now waking up in cold sweats because the one place they believed was safe has been proven a trap. What you are witnessing is not an isolated raid. This is the latest, most dramatic proof that Russia's entire naval doctrine in the Black Sea is collapsing under the weight of its own outdated assumptions, while Ukrainian forces adapt at a speed Moscow simply cannot match. This is not a story about two landing ships and a radar site. This is a case study in structural military failure, how Russian overconfidence, static defenses, and centralized command have been systematically dismantled by Ukrainian innovation, precision, and relentless doctrinal evolution. And the implications reach far beyond Sevastopol Bay. They expose a pattern of compounding miscalculations that is reshaping the entire theater of war. Pull the lens back. To understand why this strike has Russian sailors having nightmares, we must first examine the false assumptions that built this house of cards. When Russia seized Crimea in 2014, the Kremlin declared victory in the most strategic sense. They believed they had secured a permanent naval bastion. Sevastopol would be their unsinkable aircraft carrier, protected by geography, layered air defenses, shore-based missile systems, and the sheer presence of the Black Sea Fleet. Russian doctrine taught that a fleet operating from home waters, backed by S-400 batteries, Pantsir systems, and fighter patrols, would be untouchable. Ukraine had no conventional navy. The Black Sea was Russia's lake. Distance from the front lines would provide safety. Heavy conventional platforms and static fortifications would deter any threat. Moscow assumed time was on its side, that incremental upgrades and political pressure would keep the fleet dominant while Ukraine remained crippled. Those assumptions were always fatally flawed. While Russia invested billions in maintaining legacy ships and reinforcing concrete bunkers, Ukraine was forced by necessity to pioneer a new way of war. They developed low-cost unmanned systems, sea drones, aerial swarms, precision strike packages, integrated with real-time intelligence, electronic warfare, and decentralized command. They turned asymmetry into an art form. Russia doubled down on what had worked in the past: big ships, centralized control, and the belief that sheer mass and geography would prevail. Ukraine built what the future demanded: speed, surprise, and relentless adaptation. The gap was already visible years ago. Tonight's events in Sevastopol simply made it impossible to ignore any longer, and it gets even more serious from here. Let me walk you through the escalating chronology that made this terrifying strike not just possible, but inevitable. The first major crack appeared in April 2022 with the sinking of the Moskva, the Black Sea Fleet's flagship. That single loss of a Slava-class cruiser to Ukrainian Neptune missiles sent a clear message. Even the most heavily armed capital ship could be neutralized from over-the-horizon range. Russia responded by pulling its fleet farther from Ukrainian shores, but the Kremlin insisted the damage was minimal and the fleet remained operational. They were wrong. Then came the drone age. Ukrainian Magura V-5C drones began scoring repeated successes against Russian corvettes and patrol boats in the open Black Sea. In January 2024, the Ivanovets was sunk. Other vessels were damaged in daring raids that bypassed traditional radar horizons. Each time Russia claimed the incidents were insignificant, that their electronic warfare and anti-drone measures were improving. Yet the pattern was unmistakable. Ukrainian reach was extending. Their tactics were evolving faster than Russian countermeasures could adapt. By late 2024 and into 2025, Ukrainian strikes had forced the Black Sea Fleet to relocate major assets, reduced its ability to support ground operations, and compelled Moscow to rely more heavily on land-based aviation and long-range missiles launched from Russian territory. Throughout 2025, the pressure intensified. Ukrainian forces hit fuel depots, shipyards, and logistics nodes across Crimea with growing precision. Russia responded with more layered defenses, additional Panzer systems, anti-drone nets, patrol boats, and jamming equipment. Commanders assured their sailors that Sevastopol Bay remained impregnable. The very ships struck on April 18th and 19th were supposed to be protected by those upgrades. Yet Ukrainian operators had studied every layer. They had mapped the radar gaps, the response times, the predictable patterns of Russian patrols. The stage was set. The assumptions were about to be exposed in the most public, humiliating way possible. And then came the night of April 18th into the 19th. What happened in Sevastopol Bay was not random. It was the culmination of meticulous planning and doctrinal mastery. Ukrainian special forces from the Hur's primary unit launched a multi-domain swarm, dozens of unmanned surface vessels skimming the waves at high speed, supported by aerial drones acting as decoys and spotters, synchronized with precision-guided munitions. The attack unfolded in deliberate waves designed to saturate and overwhelm. First wave, low observable sea drones approached under radar clutter created by the rain and electronic jamming. Russian defenses lit up the sky with anti-air fire, but the primary strike package had already penetrated. Direct hits on the Yamal and Nikolai Filchenkov disabled their propulsion and command systems while they sat pierside, exactly where they should have been safest. The coastal radar that was supposed to provide early warning was taken out in the opening seconds, blinding the entire defense network. Secondary explosions followed as onboard munitions cooked off. Fires burned out of control for hours. Russian sailors, trained for conventional naval engagements, found themselves fighting an enemy they could barely see, an enemy that struck from the sea itself. This is what Russian doctrinal failure looks like in real time. Their layered air defense doctrine assumed threats would come from the air at predictable altitudes and speeds. Ukrainian sea drones operate at wave-top level, exploiting radar horizon limitations and weather. Their swarm tactics overwhelm point defenses through sheer numbers and coordinated saturation. Russian centralized command, reliant on senior officers in Moscow or Sevastopol issuing orders, proved too slow to react in real time. Ukrainian operators, empowered with decentralized decision-making and real-time battlefield intelligence, executed with lethal speed. The hidden military variable here, the one mainstream coverage keeps missing, is the adaptation gap. Russia is still fighting a 20th century war with 21st century tools bolted on as afterthoughts. Ukraine is fighting a 21st century war with whatever tools they can innovate fastest. Now pull the lens back to the industrial and state level consequences. This is not just about two landing ships and a radar site. The Yamal and Nikolai Filchenkov were critical logistics assets designed to move troops, equipment, and supplies to support Russian operations in southern Ukraine and beyond. Their disablement directly degrades Russia's ability to reinforce positions, rotate forces, or maintain supply lines across the Black Sea. Repair costs will run into hundreds of millions of rubles at a time when Russia's defense industry is already strained by sanctions and battlefield losses. More importantly, the psychological blow is incalculable. Russian sailors now understand that even in their home port, even under the protection of Russia's most advanced air defenses, they are vulnerable. Morale, already fragile after years of attritional losses, has taken another body blow. Recruitment and retention in the Navy will suffer. Operational tempo will slow as commanders become even more risk-averse. At the state level, this strike exposes the hollowness of Russia's claims to control the Black Sea. Moscow has used the fleet to project power, threaten grain exports, and support its land campaign. Each successful Ukrainian penetration forces Russia to divert more resources, more ships pulled back, more air assets tied down in defensive patrols, more electronic warfare systems redeployed. This compounds the economic pressure. Sanctions already limit Russia's ability to replace lost naval capability quickly. The industrial base cannot keep pace with Ukrainian innovation rates, and every time a major asset is hit in safe rear areas, it sends a signal to Russia's partners and adversaries alike. The Kremlin's conventional military superiority is an illusion. What seemed like a strategic fortress in Crimea is becoming a strategic liability. The real turning point, the climactic operation that crystallized everything, unfolded in those critical minutes after 2:47 a.m. Ukrainian forces did not simply throw drones at the target. They executed a textbook example of modern combined arms unmanned warfare. Intelligence fusion identified the exact berthing positions of the Yamal and Nikolai Filchenkov. Electronic warfare assets suppressed Russian radars and communications at the decisive moment. Decoy drones drew defensive fire away from the primary strike elements. Sea drones, operating in coordinated packs, approached from multiple vectors to overwhelm point defenses. The precision of the hits, engine rooms, command bridges, ammunition magazines, shows deep knowledge of Russian ship vulnerabilities. This was not brute force. This was doctrinal mastery, understanding that modern naval warfare favors the side that can strike first, strike precisely, and strike repeatedly without exposing high-value assets. What this operation proves doctrinally is devastating for Russia. Their concept of operations assumed rear area security through geography and technology. Ukraine has demonstrated that geography can be neutralized by unmanned systems and that technology can be defeated by superior tactics and innovation speed. The hidden variable is tempo. Ukraine iterates faster, new drone designs, new tactics, new countermeasures, while Russia reacts. This is the same pattern we have seen on the land battlefield, with drone swarms overrunning armor, in the air with long-range strikes on strategic bombers, and now at sea. Russian assumptions about sanctuary are dead. What happens next changes everything. Russia will likely respond with more static defenses, more patrols, and more propaganda claiming the damage was insignificant. But the sailors know the truth. They are the ones having nightmares. They understand that the next strike could come at any time, from any direction, and that their command cannot protect them. The broader lesson here is clear. In modern warfare, adaptation wins. Russia's failure to adapt at the doctrinal level is now a structural weakness that compounds with every passing week. This strike in Sevastopol confirms the larger pattern we have witnessed across every domain of this conflict. Russia entered the war believing its conventional superiority, its mass, and its fortified positions would deliver a quick victory. Instead, Ukrainian forces have repeatedly exposed the brittleness of those assumptions through superior innovation, faster decision cycles, and a willingness to embrace new technologies that Russia still treats as novelties. The Black Sea Fleet, once the crown jewel of Russian power projection, is now a fleet under siege even in its own harbor. Its sailors live with the constant knowledge that the next drone swarm could be inbound. Let me deliver the verdict plainly, as someone who spent decades studying how armies and navies move and adapt. What we saw in Crimea on April 18th and 19th was not a setback for Russia. It was another irreversible step in the exposure of its military system's fundamental flaws. Ukraine is not just surviving, it is dictating the terms of engagement in domains Russia once dominated by default. The adaptation race is not close. Ukraine is winning it decisively. The forecast is equally stark. Russian naval operations in the Black Sea will become even more constrained. More assets will be pulled back or kept in port under heavy guard, reducing their combat effectiveness. Logistics to Russian forces in occupied territories will face increasing strain, and the psychological toll on Russian personnel, especially the sailors who can no longer trust their home waters, will erode willingness to fight. History will record this period as the moment when the Black Sea ceased to be a Russian lake and became contested waters where Ukrainian ingenuity holds the initiative. Stay with us, because those questions do not have simple answers, and the next chapter in this story is already unfolding. The pattern is clear. The failures are compounding, and the consequences for Russia's strategic position are only beginning to reveal themselves.